Come on down to the Ark where the sun shines, but rabbit bowling shines brighter.
Hey boys, remember, nothing's better a fry off than a quiet, fluffy one.
Yeah, sure, Elizabeth would totally know what substance is in an arrow just by looking at it. Nah, that's fine, she read it in a book. These pre-rendered cutscenes are even worse. Kid! What is wrong with your neck?
You saved your best friend's father from dying in a car accident years ago.
I don't know what this reminds me of. Nothing at all!
My name's Italian. I'm Troy Baker. Whoa! And no, pretty talented man. Yeah, come check out the new Smash Bros. Brand. Come to my house and play. Yeah.
Playing this dumb, stupid game. Just don't make it. It's simple as that. Because that game reminded everyone of how cool they used to be. I turned out okay. Right? Every time you stop.
I will say that one of the things that I learned from working on Asagao is how human everybody that I kind of thought was way cooler than me is. I think, like, anytime you're looking at anybody who can't do something that you can do, whether it's like Olympic athletes or celebrities that you're a fan of or creators that you're a fan of, there's this tendency because you're looking at something that impacts you so emotionally, there's this tendency to allow that emotion to spill over into the reality of who the person who gave you that thing is, and to want to embellish them, like to just take all the positives that you feel here and put it on them. And one of the things that I learned is not just how kind of dangerous that is to potentially, to embellish somebody to that extent to where you're no longer evaluating them as like a regular person. It's dangerous in that way, and then it also just is useless. It's not something that benefits you or anyone in any way, because it prevents you from seeing things in yourself that you can actually do, that you are capable of doing if you wanted to work towards some of the stuff that the people that you're admiring are doing. Part of projecting onto them in that way is separating yourself from them and being like, they're something different, and I could never. Like, I can only aspire to be what they are. Maybe someday I'll be on that level. With anybody that you idolize, always take it with a grain of salt. Always remember that they're real people that are just like you, in every meaningful way.
The very first video about a video game that I watched on YouTube was uploaded on August 16th, 2011 by a user who, at the time, was known as Peanut3423.
Josh, let's skip the fake out intro this time. It's way too freaking long.
Fine.
It was the first half of a top 10 countdown of what two people, now known as Alex Rochon and Josh Scorcher, believed were the top 10 saddest moments in video games. And if you know anything about me, that might seem like a pretty appropriate first video for me to watch. For time reference, that means the video predated the first upload by Every Frame a Painting, the most influential video essay creator the platform has seen, by 3 full years, but was 5 years after the Angry Video Game Nerd, who was the first video game content creator of any real note. His influence is definitely felt within this video.
Annoying, annoying, annoying!
You know what they say?
Yes! We get it! We know what they freaking say!
Don't get traumatized yet. We aren't even at the first sad moment.
Fine.
I could talk about my creative influences all damn day. I vividly recall the ecstatic grin that cut across my face when I first heard the acoustic guitars kick up in Grizzly Bear's Southern Point. I remember the first time seeing anything from my favorite film, The Prestige. I'd taped using a Play TV on the PS3, a broadcast of it off the television, but it didn't pick up the sound. And I was really annoyed about that and just watched the first scene completely mute. I remember finding on the Netflix home menu some anime called Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. I was like, oh, I'll check that out. And then just binged it twice in a month while house sitting. I watched it with my cat. That was very fun. And I remember how I found those things. I found Grizzly Bear through the Chicago Music Exchange YouTube channel and watching Joel Bauman play Little Brother on a Firebird. Gibson Firebird 5, I'm pretty sure. How do I remember that? I remember how I found these things, but I can't for the life of me recall how I found Top 10 Saddest Video Game Moments Part 1, 10 to 5. I don't know how that happened. I just know that it did. And now I know that watching it would become a moment far more important to my personal and creative development than I would ever anticipate at the time. Alex and Josh may have made this video that I enjoyed, but I wasn't terribly familiar with any of the games that they were talking about, which were largely JRPGs from memory, and really the only thing that I recall from it was them talking about what happened at the end of Shadow of the Colossus, something that I pretty vividly remembered even though I didn't actually play the game for another 8 years. I never forgot that. YouTube looked really different back then than it does now, especially on the screen of like a Nokia E71 or an iPhone 4 like I had. And there was something about this sort of content that really intrigued me. There were videos about games that seemed to stand out amongst the field of like Ray William Johnson or Fred or Annoying Orange at the time. And I wanted more, but I didn't really know these games, so I went looking for other creators who were talking about games that I knew and figured that more top 10 stuff would probably be a good place to start. So that's what I put into the search bar. Top 10 videos about games. And that led me very quickly to the videos of Peanut Butter Gamer, JonTron, and The Completionist, and soon their wider circle of friends under the vague group title of NormalBoots. The NormalBoots content creator group, as it was known then, included several creators who all made video game content online, and NormalBoots.com was set up as their own video hosting platform. I don't claim to have any insider knowledge on this, but eventually that idea was scrapped and they just started posting on YouTube exclusively, and the name NormalBoots was all that really remained, with it just being a flashy intro at the start of their videos. The members of the group were the two founding members, Peanut Butter Gamer and JonTron, alongside Gerard the Completionist, Pro Jared, Satchbags Goods, the Let's Play group Continue and their own 3 members, and the trivia channel Did You Know Gaming, and the man behind that, Shane. Like Angry Video Game Nerd before them, NormalBoots became something I think of a blueprint for other content creators who either wanted to start or wanted to be a part of something, most significantly spawning a sister group known as Hidden Block, which included creators Brutal Moose, Youngtown, Jimmy Wetzel, Balrog the Master, Space Hamster, and Kadikarus. This was like a huge, massive hub, these two groups of about a dozen guys who just made cool videos about games. The people of these two groups have, through their various efforts and collaborations, whether inside the groups like PB and Jeff or even into Game Grumps and outside of it, made so many hours of online content for over a decade, enjoyed by millions of people. Not to say nothing of panel shows, live appearances, streaming, music, other projects they've gone on to create as well. One of them has made probably my favorite video on YouTube in its entirety, Youngtown's epic COD run.
This is in regards to the artist who are at a stop and our content with whatever just to get and upload up. You must know the algorithms and be analytical. If you're not prototypical, statistically you won't belong.
Some of them no longer make stuff. Sometimes those videos have been lost to copyright or removed or remade or just, lost to the ether of time. But those were the days when YouTube was promoting gaming content more highly than anything else. And there was something of a Wild West feeling to it. And NormalBoots was sort of like this pillar that I gravitated toward, and it was just what I did. I just watched NormalBoots videos. It didn't really matter that I'd never owned a Nintendo 64, that I'd never played a Final Fantasy or Banjo-Kazooie title. These guys were funny, they were wild, they were silly, it was like having a friend whenever you needed one, watching a cool, funny home video that they made, and it was something that I followed for a fair few years of high school and quickly inspired me to start making my own content online. I would release my very first piece of video game content in late 2011, a video entitled I Don't Like Skyrim. I removed it from the channel after realizing it was terrible and deleted all my files of it too, so I actually don't have it anywhere. I remember enough of it and know that it was garbage, but the next video that of mine that I actually have after about a year of trying to make Ocarina of Time Let's Plays was a top 5 hardest decisions in the Walking Dead game video. I remember recording it through an Officeworks headset microphone on a Windows sound recorder application in one take because I didn't know how to edit audio yet. I'd played the game on an iPad to begin with, and I didn't know how to record that, so I just ripped other people's gameplay off of YouTube using SaveTube or KeepVid.com and edited the whole thing on Cyberlink PowerDirector 7 or something. And somehow before I took it down, the video had accrued somewhere around 33,000 views. This pattern would continue for me for several years. I would make 1 or 2 videos about a game every 6 months, all of them as high quality as you'd expect from someone taking it so seriously. And of course, because every NormalBoots inspired content creator needs a fancy name, the name I chose was Batman Fan 119. Eventually I changed it to The Prophet, because I thought that was probably better. Made a video about a Lord of the Rings game made for the PlayStation Move called Aragorn's Quest. I made a video about some Flash games called Dragon Fable and Mech Quest that you might have heard of. I played them a lot in primary school. It was a bit of a nostalgia trip. My personal favorites were the silly ones, the ones where I do stupid voices, like "lol" and stuff like that. Some of them still make me laugh today, actually, and you saw some clips of all these videos earlier. And my hope is that anyone who watches what I do today is subscribed and has followed my work for any length of time, maybe sees those old videos and what I used to make and can't reconcile them with the Micah that they know. I really hope that that's the case, because back then, all I was doing, I was just trying to make NormalBoots videos. I was making videos that I saw other people making and trying to replicate their formulas, replicate their jokes, and do what they did. That's all that it was. And what I make now, I feel like is much more of an honest sort of expression of me. I have full knowledge of the path that led me here to making the videos that I make today, that I consider quite honest and I'm really proud of. But I don't know how I come across to people on my channel if all you see is just what I make and leave here. I do get quite personal in my videos, so maybe people who followed me for a little while may get the impression that they know me quite well as a person, even though they probably don't. How do I come across? Am I a melodramatically serious sad boy who likes piano too much and tells a joke about twice a year? Am I just a mega hardcore Ratchet and Clank fan? Who am I? I don't know, but my hope is that my content today isn't particularly reminiscent of anyone else's online and that it feels like an honest expression of me and who I am, that I'm not trying to make NormalBoots videos anymore. And that only comes with experience and a diversification of your influences. Like, if I was only watching PBG and JonTron, those were the videos that I was trying to make. And all this time later, I feel like I'm in a much more original place. But if you go to youtube.com/BatmanFan119, it'll still take you to my channel today. So internet history, like my old videos and those creators who inspired me to make them, is a really funny thing, because the internet, as vast and exhaustive an informational resource as it is often cataloging things that took place outside of the digital sphere. And for some reason, maybe it's just my generation of people who were old enough to remember a more primitive internet before it was this evolved, but I still, for some reason, perceive things created on the internet and consumed through it that only exist there to be completely different and not the same as like physical or traditional media, particularly in terms of creative influence. And it's sort of hard, like I'm having to catch up to that. Like, what is this actually meant to me? Because I've been here for 10 years and that's like a long time. I'm kind of stuck, aren't I? I'm doing the same shit that I was doing when I was 14 years old. I only have my own perspective, but I think I'm confident in the thought that everybody who works in my particular circle or even just has YouTube as a substantial part of their everyday consumption of media has this sort of lineage to their journey with the platform, a journey that they'll only know about and has pockets and detours that they'll probably have forgotten, communities and creators that they gravitated toward, and that initial one person that opened the door, that showed them, hey, you probably want to hang out here a little bit. This is a real place. This is a viable way to spread your creativity. For me, that person was NormalBoots, and specifically Peanut Butter Gamer. But it could be literally anybody. Like, I've no doubt in my mind that I only did those videos back in the day, and maybe I'm only here today because I watched NormalBoots do this first, because I would not have had this idea on my own. I didn't know that videos about games were even something you could do before I was invested in their work. And I spent a lot of my time cutting my teeth trying to replicate what they do. Yeah, maybe I'd have found out later and this was meant to be or whatever, but if that initial Peanut 3423 video was just something kind of cool and didn't push me to make my own stuff, I think there was something about specifically the NormalBoots creators hitting me at my time of life that I found more aspirational than anyone else on the scene at the time. But my question now has changed into something that eats away at me a little bit sometimes. How much, what do I owe these people? How much do I owe my creations to their influence? What percentage of credit should they receive for the things that I make today because of the simple idea that I may never have made it had I not watched them do it first? It's another barrier for entry in my pride in what I make here on this channel, in the same way that my videos are inexorably tethered to the media and the studios that make the projects that I talk about, and that I'm hosted on a site that I'm at the mercy of, that I have no control over. There's so many dominoes of dependencies, and I want to know at what point this stops becoming somebody else's and starts becoming mine. Where's the line between influence and creation? Because I'm pretty sure that I'm only here, and you're only here because of NormalBoots. I don't know the answer to this question, but it's not something I'm as concerned about for myself today as I am for Cara Hillstock, the writer and narrative designer of a visual novel dating simulator released in 2016 named Asagao Academy. I wonder what she thinks of the separation of art from influence, because the game she made features Peanut Butter Gamer, Jontron, The Completionist, Pro Jared, Satchbags Goods, the members of Continue, and Shane from Did You Know Gaming, the members of the NormalBoots content creator group, as the romanceable characters.
I'm still surprised that it's actually a real thing. I can date myself in a game.
First.
God.
Look at how lovingly Paul's touching your shoulder.
I know.
They're beautiful.
I want to play a game that's going to excite everyone and yet creep them out due to the premise on paper. I want to play a game about dating me and all of my friends here at NormalBoots. And this game is real, it's out now, and most importantly, it's free.
And I want to know if she's all right with that. So I asked her.
My name is Cara Hillstock. I'm a narrative designer for a bunch of video games. I also stream on the side, and I wrote and directed Asagao Academy NormalBoots Club.
How did you first get into the game development space? I'm curious about that.
Well, I have a background as a professional writer doing other things, and so eventually my boyfriend at the time pointed out that I have this love for video games and I have this love for writing, and maybe I could merge the two.
Right.
And that was the first time that I had ever considered that that was a possibility. So I literally reached out to a complete stranger on the internet who read a similar like visual novel blog that I like to read. They said that they were making a game in the comments. I sent them a message and I was like, "Hey, I'm an editor, like as my job. Could I volunteer to work on your game?" And from there, it just kind of, they let me know that they believed I should charge for my services, so I started doing that, and then I just kind of built up a reputation from there.
That's a pretty awesome first experience from what I know of the game space, at least.
Yeah, I was really lucky. I think that I got a really wonderful, supportive person. This was, I want to say like 2014, 2013, probably.
Wow. No, I'm just expressing amazement that you stepped into games in 2014 and then Asagao was released in 2016. That's a pretty big jump.
Yeah, I had this job, and then I instantly kind of, I don't want to say lucked out, but I was a big fan of the game Cinders by Moacube, which is another visual novel. And I was such a big fan that when they started their next game called Solstice, I was in the forums and they were like, "Oh, you can submit feedback if you want. And I got really hyped, and I just I took the first section of the game and just went through all of it and was like, here's all of my feedback. And they were like, hey, maybe don't do this much work because like we are gonna hire somebody to and pay them for it later on. And I was like, oh, okay. And I chilled out. And then a couple months later, they were like, hey, we figured we could just hire you. And then after that, I found out that Asagao, so the original idea was Danielle Hargrave, who is PBG's wife. It was she drew like kind of anime-esque versions of them, and everybody really liked it, and the response was really good. So she started looking at making an actual dating sim, and put out a request to hire people as writers. So I was initially brought on just as a writer, and the only person who had prior experience working on visual novels.
Wow.
I guess that's kind of, I was a fan and also knew how to make games.
Asagao Academy NormalBoots Club is one of the most fascinating and unique video games I think you are ever likely to come across. It's such a strange blend of so many different things of such a time that it truly makes me feel things that I haven't felt as a result of any other piece of media I may have ever encountered.
Sometimes there's times to articulate things that you're feeling and to make a point about them, but other times you just need to go, ugh. And that's all that needs to be said.
It is one part excellent visual novel dating simulator, a successfully kickstarted one with really great music and emotive prose and unique art. It's also a time capsule of a moment of internet culture of which there is almost no other concrete record as intimate or exhaustive. It's a deep love letter to about a dozen internet creators and how they existed during a very short window in the mid-2010s. It features a deep knowledge and is pretty fully invested in the minutiae of their content, which only a small group of extremely dedicated internet users is even likely to understand.
Take My Star by our resident rapper Youngtown. Gotta love that guy. That's an actual song that he made. I only just realized the song is based on the Pro Jared theme. We've got to wait for the melody.
I probably don't need to flag that the connotations of the premise alone are numerous, and depending therefore on how you come at it, Asagao could be read allegorically as how somebody may find and gravitate toward a content creator during difficult times, or even further back from that, as either a manifestation or deconstruction of the very nature of parasocial fantasy, while at the same time it valiantly forges in a direction of its own, becoming its own standalone visual novel rooted in anime tropes, and is a pretty solid example of the romance genre.
All of the writing of Asagao is kind of meant to make it feel like you're in a slice of life shoujo anime. And so it's very stylized towards that, and it's very silly, and it's very fun. But that's like a really like one niche of writing compared to everything else. I also look at writing as like a toolbox of skill sets, and for each individual thing that you make, you kind of need to like tune up and down where you're putting the emphasis and how much you're relying on certain skills.
It tells the story of Hana, a student from Japan who was given a scholarship to the prestigious and expensive private Asagao Academy to finish her high school education. She's dealing with the recent death of her mother, her and her father's own poverty, her own insecurities and anxieties, and approaching the school places her well and truly out of her depth.
They accepted scholarship students like me to help pull up the grades of the students who got in purely because of money. The rest of the students were accepted based on merit, a combination of talent, looks, and smarts. If the academy fell in its ranking, the more well-to-do families would pick a better school to send their children to. That would be devastating for them. So midterms are a big deal. This wealth inequality angle, I'm really digging. I really enjoy this.
She soon meets her roommate Mai and the group of rich popular boys named the NormalBoots Club, and begins the slow process of becoming accustomed to this new life and finding friendships with these new and stunning people. Later on in the game, Hana gets a shot at becoming a member of the NormalBoots Club herself by competing alongside them in a gaming tournament where they face off against the Hidden Block crew, a rival club, every year. And alongside this, she can choose one of the members of the NormalBoots Club to maybe pursue romantically.
Who was the game sort of for? Was it primarily the visual novel audience, or primarily the audience of the NormalBoots creators online?
Both.
Both. Yeah.
Because there were 3 of us who were primarily working on the game. Me, Danny, and another girl named Nikki. I think we all kind of had a little bit of variance in what we wanted the game to be, but we all solidified around the fact that we wanted visual novel fans to become interested in these YouTubers, and we wanted these YouTubers fans to become more interested in visual novels and hopefully like get them to convert and start buying more visual novels after this experience. And both of those things did happen. So
Yeah.
success.
But the game itself is, again, a pretty excellent, at times serious and dour, but on the whole quite bright and hopeful story about its main character, Hana, dealing with social anxiety, struggles with self-perception, struggles with wealth and beauty privilege, navigating high school, and the difficult relationships they're in. And if that sounds like a whole lot more game than you were expecting from a premise of date your favorite YouTuber, strap in. Asagao Academy is not a lip service experiment on this premise. This is a monster of a game. To look at the game from a distance is one thing, because from far away, it's easy to look at it and go, this is a really bad idea to make a game about, but it's also kind of fascinating for exactly that reason. And any pot shot I think you could take at its premise falls apart as soon as you actually get into the details of the execution, how sincere it comes across as being, as well as its sheer size. With a reported 7 full routes, 2 hidden side routes, 43 different endings, 32 hand-drawn scenes, 16 original songs, over 340,000 words, with partial voice acting from members of NormalBoots, Hidden Block, as well as outside voice talent, the visual novel dating simulator Asagao Academy made full use of its successful Kickstarter campaign, the very first one that I remember contributing to. 340,000 words is the approximate word count of Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers. Twice. Then add another 30,000, raising around $27,000 to go toward its development over twice its intended target. The community of these creators was behind the game in a way that a simple fan-created game doesn't often receive. Asagao Academy was a big deal, and in my opinion, given who and what it's about, is a seriously daunting piece of work.
Because there was one stretch goal that you didn't get to achieve, right? Was there any sort of like, oh, with a little bit more budget, we could do some of this? What's crowdfunding a game like?
I didn't get put in the position of a director until I would say maybe like 6 to 8 months in. And it was like a month or 2 after I was director that the Kickstarter happened and we organized it and everything. And we weren't looking at it, I guess, in the way that a typical game studio would look at a Kickstarter nowadays, because the landscape is so different.
Yep.
Back then, visual novel Kickstarters couldn't really make a lot of money, so we wanted to ask for basically enough money that we could pay contractors for the things that we needed, and then we weren't really going to be paying ourselves, and then money for like the Kickstarter rewards and taxes and all of that fun stuff. So in hindsight, it's actually really great that we didn't hit those stretch goals, because there is just the amount of development time that would have added to the game in order to do it in the way that we were thinking of. Whoa, we would have needed to ask for way more money in order to make that even possible. Because at this point, and even kind of now with Asagao, we got some money from the Kickstarter, and then we released the game for free with the option to pay if you wanted to. And so we got like some money from that, but I wouldn't say that it was the amount of money that would, you know, pay for the amount of time that we spent developing the game, or even necessarily prepare us for developing another game in the future. And so in hindsight, it was really good that the Kickstarter didn't explode more than it did, but it was really important because we wouldn't have been able to get the kinds, like the backgrounds, the UI, the programmer, the musicians, like all of these are people that we paid using the money from the Kickstarter. And so the game would not have been nearly as big or as quality, I would say, unless we figured out some way to do everything for free ourselves.
It was so different in the dorms in the morning. Instead of the constant hum of blow dryers and irritable girls, there was an expectant silence. It would be like an asylum if it weren't for the pink walls and flowers on every door. Just emotive writing. Visually, you're restricted to 3 sentences? Like, this fills up the whole space, so you can't have your descriptions be too long. Word choice seems to be something that's pretty important here. This is like a great example of getting your point across using several of the physical senses. It's talking about sound, it's talking about people, relating people to the space, it's talking about emotion of the sound, and then giving it like a context using color and smell of flowers and like an asylum. So there's an atmosphere to it, but there's also sound to it. There's an attitude to this environment. Just really sort of effective writing in a really short amount of time. And this kind of thing is all over the game.
But like the size of it, is there any particular challenge in navigating a project of this size?
So for me, this was really my first experience like project managing a game. And we also were a more, because we knew like this game wasn't for profit, we all knew that going in. It wasn't the kind of situation where we needed to get it out by a certain time, or, there wasn't that kind of pressure. So we allowed each other, when we needed time away from the game to do other things, we gave each other that time, and it was like a really supportive, nice atmosphere. That being said, it's really a massive game. I don't think that we understood what we were getting ourselves into when we started. I ended up, so originally it was supposed to be me and the other writer splitting like half and half of the routes. And chapter 1, the first chapter of the game, it was split between me and Danny and Nikki, and we all split that. And then from chapter 2 on for each of the routes, I wrote all of the routes except for Shane's route, which is the route that Nikki wrote, and one of the most popular routes too. It ended up kind of coming down on me to get that massive amount of writing in, and then it came down on Danny to get all of the CGs in, all of the animations, all of the sprites, and all of the outfits. All of that was Danny, and so there was just a massive amount of work to kind of slog through. And really the thing that I think motivated us in getting it done was we would come to each other when we finished something and like get really hype each other up and like compliment each other a bunch, and that kind of, I think, kept pushing us along kind of side by side.
From a critical standpoint, my biggest gripe is probably with the sound. The music is really good, and I enjoyed the production aspects on the tracks a lot more than I expected to, but the occasional vocal snippets can really vary in volume. It's obvious that with a cast who were spread out all over the country that they probably all use their own microphones, so the timbre of their instruments doesn't always match up. There's a very particular squeal of excitement which the character Mai does, which just straight up clips the performer's microphone. The vocal direction can be a little bit hit or miss, particularly with Shane, who wasn't a voiceover content creator at the time.
Asagao Academy NormalBoots Club.
Shane, my guy, put some oomph in it.
But the main vocalist for Hana, Samantha Chan, does a really awesome job in giving the character a defined personality through short barks and vocalizations. But in terms of visuals, I've got no complaints. Not just the characters, but the backgrounds here are really quite charming. The UI is responsive and functional, and while it sometimes was prone to crashes and instability, the game ran on the whole quite smoothly, and I really enjoyed the attention to detail on multiple different wardrobes and times of day for each area or character that was here. There's a lot of unexpected detail in the game.
That outfit for Maya is great. Jared's just wearing his Walmart shirt.
Cara was also pretty passionate about insisting that there was a pretty large team working on this game that helped to make it as quality as it was.
So after the game came out, I just was the person who did most of the like media for the game.
Yeah.
So I just was like kind of the face out there. And that's, because the other people weren't as comfortable with it as me, which I like was a professional actor back in the day, so I'm kind of used to it. But one of the fallouts from that is that there were so many other people who worked on the project. So much of the ideas that are in the game, like they're not just mine. We all, especially like Nikki and Danny and I, we all worked together. We brainstormed. We hashed out the entire outline for the whole game and all of the characters before any of us really started writing it. And so it's really a cumulative effort between all of us. We had a programmer, we had 3 different musicians.
Haven't heard this song yet. This is cool.
We had the UI artist, we had the background artist. And so there's so many other people who were involved in large and small capacities in the game. And I feel like despite me trying to say that a lot, like, you know, I'm the face, so I'm the one that people remember. And so I wish that they would be able to get more credit for the work that they put in.
A little bit of Steve Jordan going on.
All in all, the voice work is a rough patch to be expected, but one of the only concrete shortcomings I think I could mention about this game, which on every other front gets incredibly complicated, incredibly quickly, not only given what it's about, but also given its quality. My conversation with Cara covered many interesting topics, and you can see the full interview over on my Patreon if you'd like to check that out, thanks. But the thing I was most interested in was how a game like this sort of comes about, and like I often do on my channel, what her own creative goals and aspirations were while she was making it. She told me about some of the lessons she'd learned, some of the difficulties that happen when you're writing about real people, and the intentions behind making the game the way that it was. And I was curious to see if I could find something of a kindred spirit in this game, with it sort of being inspired by and built around the same personas that my early work was very attached to. Cara tended to speak of the game in the past tense.
For me, I was never in the mindset of developing it as a fan game because I went in with the mission to make it more than a fan game. When I applied, I was like, I would like to work on this because I think that we could do something really great for visual novels by bringing people into them. And I want to make it its own game that like kind of stands on its own rights. And sure, NormalBoots is what gets a lot of people into it to play it, but then the game itself is its own experience. So I don't necessarily consider it a fan game, but I think most people would probably classify it as a fan game.
Yes, it is. It is a date, and you should smooch him. Smooch him good. This is how I get when I'm watching like a cute love story in an anime that I enjoy. Not many of those happen, but I'm always like, just smooch, you know, just do that. Like, that's my attitude toward when this is working. So this is really good.
So when I was brought on to the project, there were some aspects of the game that had already been kind of thought through or maybe experimented with, and then there were aspects of the game that we either fleshed out or just completely changed entirely. And Hana was one of the characters that was already very clear in Danny's mind, and she had like the wealth inequality, her anxiety, her past. She had everything kind of sorted out and really wanted to incorporate a character arc for Hana into the story, which I was super on board with.
I got a little Jackie. That's so cute.
And I also, you know, I have PTSD myself, so I also struggle with anxiety. I had a lot that I could relate to with Hana's experiences and how terrifying it can be to go into a place like that.
I think that there's an indelible power to the phrase "I'm scared," and choosing to place it right here is very powerful.
We felt a lot of affection for Hana and Maya in particular. I think especially because they were like all of the original characters. We felt so much affection for them, whereas the NormalBoots characters, there was just a lot more anxiety with them because there was a lot more like, oh my god, what if we do something and then one of them hates it, or we accidentally like upset them or something.
I really didn't think that they would do that. They were outwardly saying, "This is creepy. It's making me scared." Like the "I'm scared" thing. And it was like Youngtown.
And also just like the weirdness of writing about real people. I remember at that point I had moved up to Washington to develop the game with Danny, and I was rooming with Space Hamster at the time. So the Hidden Block Club that was also in the game.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting there like trying to write PBG and Hana's like final romance scenes.
Where are you going? You have to smooch me.
As like in the next room, I'm hearing Jeff just go off to like recording his voice lines for the game, which we submitted without any context. We were like, these are the voice lines, do them. and just like panicking about how weird it was and
Yeah.
feeling so strange about everything that was happening, especially because it was my friend's husband.
Yeah.
So now I'm like writing this strange romance scene about her husband.
Finally! Gosh! Finally. A toast.
Was there anything allegorical or meta about the writing at all?
I mean, absolutely, there's a lot of meta in the game. If you complete all of the routes, then you start to see a lot of where the meta-ness is. Like, Hana is a main character, and that's a thing in the lore of this universe, so she attracts like spectacular events to happen to her, and that's why they happen to her and not to Mai, and that's why she has pink hair, and that's why her mom's dead, and like all of this stuff.
Amnesia. It happens.
As far as the parasocial nature of it, I didn't go into writing any of the routes thinking like this is what I want to be one of the main takeaways. But as much as we possibly could, we did want to try and, I guess, subvert the expectations of the people who were coming into the game, who might maybe be going in with a little bit of that parasocial thing going on, maybe like genuinely wanting to date these people. And that's part of why a lot of Hana's journeys in each of the individual routes is much more focused on her learning something about herself or overcoming something that she's going through with the help of these people, but they're helping her, they're not the cause of what makes her special. They're still put upon a pedestal. The hope was that by the end of the game, it feels like they've come slightly more down to earth, and Hana instead has like leveled up to be alongside them and is just as great in her own right as any of them are, and just as complex and interesting of a character as any of them are. The goal was more to shift the expectations of what kind of story was being told, or somewhere around the middle part, and by going into a lot of the emotional conflicts that are in the game, and by making it as real and about as many real like struggles that people actually have as possible, trying to bring things a little bit down to earth. When I was writing it, I still do have very strong feelings about parasocial relationships, and I thought that it would be really bad if a lot of people came out of the game wanting to idolize the real people as though they were their characters in Asagao.
Interesting. Fan service. I mean, I'm Pan, and I'm not looking for this. I'm not after this. Okay, I need to get over myself here. That's what I need to do. I need to remove myself from the situation. I try and understand these guys as characters for a second. This is definitely meant to be funny, but the layers of this are making it really hard and really awkward. Whereas I think if this didn't look like Austin, this would be very different, and I would not have trouble with this. But right now it's a little weird. It's just like, no, I needed to. Okay.
The involvement of the NormalBoots crew, was there ever any discussion of like future proofing while you were writing?
So the NormalBoots, the actual NormalBoots YouTubers weren't involved in the creation of the game at all. They knew that it was happening, and they just kind of trusted us to handle it. They didn't know, like, they literally didn't even know anything that was in the game. So when the game came out, it was a complete surprise to them as well. We didn't, like, go to them to have them approve of anything. They just trusted us with their brands, and we understood that that was a heavy responsibility, and so we did our best to handle that with as much care as we could. After the game came out, there were complications from that because it was a NormalBoots branded game, but it didn't actually have anything to do with NormalBoots. Not everybody was comfortable with that, and so we had like the opportunity to pursue a lot of really cool things that came out of it, and because of the discomfort, we didn't really get to do much with it after that, I'll say.
Using their brands particularly, was there ever any like a discussion of like we should just say Austin instead of PBG, or like keep their online personas out of the game at all? Because that particular element is the part that makes me uncomfortable as a player, looking at these guys as like this like sort of elevated in their school status, sort of mimicking how they're elevated as content creators. There's something parasocial about it, I think. Was there ever any like, we should just keep this as the people and not as the brands?
Yes, that was actually a huge portion of our discussions, and including the parasocial aspect too.
Yeah.
That's why in the game all of the characters, I mean, they're referred to as though they're the real people, but we made a very clear distinction between like who the real people are and who these characters are, and these characters are like visual novel tropes. These characters are not real people. We do poke fun at the NormalBoots club being like this like, because we thought it was funny that like this group of guys who make like YouTube videos about games, but in this school they're this like, oh, whoa, everybody's so impressed by and it also is just very shoujo anime that like, of course there's the club of the rich, like popular boys, and so it just fit the tropes really well. But we worked really hard to kind of make a clear distinction between the NormalBoots characters and who the actual people that make up NormalBoots are, because they're completely different. And aside from like sharing the name and sharing like in-jokes from their videos and sharing, I think, a bit of the personalities, because we took inspiration, or rather I took inspiration from how they crafted their YouTube videos. You know, based off of a YouTube video, I'd be like, oh, I think maybe the person who makes this video would be like this. Because the other thing was that I only really met, I think Austin and Shane were the only NormalBoots members that I like really actually got to meet and spend any amount of time with during the development of the game. And so they were really complete strangers to me. And so I was just trying to make likable characters that seemed like they were familiar to fans.
Leave it to me.
Oh wait, how would PBG say that?
Hey guys, leave it to me. I am the greatest gamer. Something like that would be Peanut Butter Gamer.
I've never seen a wall with ears.
Okay. I have never seen a wall with ears.
Do you think a game like this could or should be made today?
I think it definitely could be made today. I've seen people try to make games based off of real people. Since I would advise against it if it were me. Like I don't intend on ever making a game involving real people again, and I don't think that I would have made a game about real people except for this specific context where she knew all of them and like they were all okay with it. They were super on board. I eventually became friends with a lot of them. They were actually really excited about it. They were like, this is so cool, a game about us, that's awesome. I think without that context, if it was just a game about other people, or like you absolutely need to get consent to be able to do this. But then there are a lot of drawbacks that I think comes from it. The anxiety of handling real people and trying to accurately represent however you use real people in the game. If you're trying to represent them as real people, or you're trying to represent them as characters based on the real person, there's a lot to unpack there about how you handle things, how you handle, you know, how positive do you go? How negative are you allowed to go? What are you allowed to do with it once it's actually released? And what are those people allowed to do with it once it's released? And how will anything that happens to literally anybody that was in the game after the game releases, what is that going to do to the game? I think in hindsight, the amount of anxiety that I had while working on it, just trying to make sure that I wasn't going to be disappointing fans and trying to make sure that I wasn't going to be disappointing the actual people. It was really difficult, and I'm glad that I did it, but I wouldn't necessarily suggest it to other people.
Do you like the game these days?
If I'm looking at the game, if I'm looking at the game in isolation from everything that exists outside of just the game, I'm really proud of it. I think it's great. I think the message that it contains is really nice and wholesome. There's a lot of people who've like gained friendships from it. There's just a lot of positives that came from it. I don't think that I would necessarily change anything about it, because I feel like it's really a product of its time. It's like a product of like, I guess, who we all were at that time. We were all so optimistic and maybe even a little bit naive, I would say, and just wanting to put out something really positive. But if we're talking about like now with all of the outside stuff that kind of retroactively changes what the game is because of what we know has happened since it released, it's really disappointing. It's like hard. It's hard for me to feel the same way about it. I can't even. It feels like something I can't even necessarily bring up to like other devs that often, because it, you know, there's that whole like I have to explain everything. So it's disappointing because I feel like the game itself is still strong, but I guess that's the nature of creating a game that's based off of real people.
Would you say that someone should still play the game despite that?
I mean, that's not something that I can necessarily suggest for any person in particular. I think that it's still a strong game if you're the kind of person who either just like has no attachment to these people, or you're able to like compartmentalize that away, or just you're the type of person who looks at art as art and doesn't think about the artist. Which, I mean, again, they weren't involved in the game, so, you know, your mileage may vary. I think that if you're interested in it, you should check it out. And then if it's too weird for you, you should stop playing. Because it's free. You don't really risk anything by trying to play it. And it's a weird thing. I think it's a weird thing that I did.
So, yeah, one of the more interesting things about Asagao retrospectively is that it exists as some sort of tribute to a group of creators who no longer exist together in this capacity, and presents something of a show of unity between them that definitely doesn't exist now, but leads us to question if it was ever really real in the first place. Asagao as a game tries valiantly to become its own thing in light of that, but still, things outside the game, moments in these creators' lives, whether they're true or not, can affect how an audience member sees or perceives the people that the characters in this game are based on, which in the moment may have been one way and today is entirely different. The state of the NormalBoots crew, their friendships and collaborations, any social drama they stumble into, changes the context in which this game exists today, as if it still stands by them when it and those who made it may not. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but this is the internet, so yeah, most of the time it's probably a bad thing. The most clear change I perceive in how internet communities surrounding creators like this has changed since the game was developed is a slow and much needed decrease in the idolization that these kinds of creators receive. Vloggers are a different story, but the audience size watching these creators today feels much more modest than it used to. These creators in the gaming field are not the main deal on YouTube anymore, but they used to be. And now those members of NormalBoots are nowhere near the upper echelon of creators, even in their field, that you would expect a commercially available game to be made about today. What replaces that is love from the audience, not the size of their audience, the dedication of each individual member of that community. How do you manifest that? By telling them that they're part of a community and not just following one person. Without meaning to sound harsh, but without trying to beat around the bush, there is a power dynamic born between a creator and their audience that NormalBoots, by declaring themselves as a united community of creators, made a lot worse than it needed to be. Their audience bought into it, I certainly did, and looked up to these 20-something guys with glazed over expressions like they could do no wrong, like they were the best of friends. It destroyed their personability. I wasn't really taught to question how much they actually knew about games, or what aggressive or benign attitudes their content actually reflected or seemed to encourage. Even with all the positive stuff, it was a problem, and I'm so confident that it was something about this whole community of people and wasn't just me. I'm so confident this parasocial thing was real because Asagao Academy sort of captured it and emanates it at a powerful level. And it's something that, to its credit, NormalBoots, after its relaunches, which took place both in 2018 and just 3 months ago in mid-2021, is avoiding by actually becoming something definitive, and is hosting content they make as a collective rather than acting as an implied association of individuals with no infrastructure behind it. I'm talking about the pre-2016 NormalBoots here. The NormalBoots this game was written about. The nebulous OG thing that was flash intros and barely anything else. It was a way for each creator to say, hey, I'm affiliated with these other people, which implied mutual association and endorsement, but also had the caveat of mutually assured involvement in the same controversies, the same drama, which I am not exaggerating, is more talked about in regard to NormalBoots than anything that actually made or produced as a group. They have to be. There's a channel now, there are shows, there's a Discord and something to support the name and idea, which simply wasn't there before, or at least was extremely hard to find and interact with in any centralized place, or I simply was not aware of at the time. It wasn't like a podcast until 2018, but it was launched nearly 9 years before that. But I suppose being affected by the passage of time is something that any work based on a living person might have to deal with. But it is one thing to make a film based on like a deceased celebrity or someone who's still living, but I think another to make something that's so intimate and personal in its fiction about people who were in their 20s at the relative start of their careers in a really new and constantly changing field, especially in the time it was. Like 2016, some shit was about to go down. So the first way that the game dates itself is by being based on the internet, which is the most swiftly moving river that the world has ever seen. This stuff doesn't stay the same, and because these channels and these creators were more often than not based on just one individual's desire to create, if that desire changes at all, like, it's a very fragile thing, and a lot of these people have really moved on since. But it's also going to be dated because these people are still open to making public mistakes. So the fragile points of Asagao as a moral work for any person who might approach it belongs to the faces of each and every one of the people that it depicts. If any one of these creators turned out to do something morally objectionable, it not only affects their work and their lives and their communities and their families and such, but also this relic of a visual novel in which so much love and time was poured. And there is nothing to say that today is the final state in which Asagao Academy exists. Maybe further down the line, another one of these creators could do something awful, and it'll act as another mark against the game, another test for anyone who might want to play it, and another emotionally difficult thing to grapple with for anyone whose hard work it contains. All of this stuff, all of what surrounds it, everything that the game is tied to affects how the game is and changes the context in which it exists. It's such a difficult thing. And now that the internet is a lot wiser or more aware of that power dynamic which exists between a creator and their audience, there's a question asked of anybody who might want to play this game today that I don't think really was asked when it first came out. Are you comfortable with this at all? Is this just too much for you? Is it too weird? Does it feel too predatory? Do the people who inspired this work actually write off the work? More specifically, a test revolves around two specific creators who have been involved in very public scandals in the time since the game was released, which I won't go into detail on, but at the root of things came down to them misunderstanding or denying the power of their words in the position that they occupy in society. Whether they were speaking on larger societal issues like race and immigration or inside individual conversations with their fans, they decided to deny or ignore or neglect that their words contain a power that is not belonging to everybody because of who they are, the size of their audience, and what they do for a living. They took it for granted. They bought into their own illusion of just being a person in their house who makes videos on the internet and lost track of the power that they had to some pretty awful repercussions. So while, yeah, I've had to do my own sort of reassessment of these two creators or anybody in this game and how they inspired me in my work, I didn't make a game where you could make them your boyfriend, in which that power dynamic is sort of contextualized. I don't think it's much to say that this game took it a lot further. And I'm not trying to stir up shit, but just so that it's clear on my end and who you're listening to, I need to be super clear. Black Lives Matter, reverse racism doesn't exist. Don't have sexual conversations with your fans. Just don't fucking do it. Not trying to stir up shit, but I need it to be clear where I stand on that. Overall, my own thoughts on Asagao Academy are likely too personal and too reliant on my own situation to be of any real value when it comes to recommending whether anybody else play the game. I think it is a really well-made game, and there's a lot that's interesting and really honest and eloquent about what it contains. Its handling of choice elements in its stories, in my opinion, is actually quite powerful. And there's probably no real use in me going super in-depth on each of the routes, because I think my relationship to this game might be very different than anybody else's, and I think the relationship anyone would have to this game is very, very subjective. Somebody who never watched a NormalBoots video, or maybe doesn't know that these people are drawn from real-life figures at all, could have a radically different experience to someone who had. And in that way, I think this is a really unique and fascinating game. Biographical games, or games that sort of are based on real people, in my experience, are not something that I come across all that often at all. And I think it's a valuable game for that reason alone. But I also do believe that Asagao would be a better, stronger, easier experience to get through if you weren't approaching it as though it was based on real people at all. But that isn't a view that I'm fully capable of taking. It's really difficult to see this title as a separate entity for me when it's so closely tied to a bunch of creators who themselves have their own creative dependencies. Whether it was just that they reviewed games on their channels, or themed aspects of their personalities and output around other properties in seeming totality, like Zelda Month or Dungeons and Dragons or something, Asagao Academy exists as a direct product of a bunch of creatives whose work exists in this weird liminal space between original work and reliant on the audience's interest in the thing that they're speaking about. It's a line that everybody who makes video essays has to walk. Are videos about other media even technically original content at all? Is this valuable work when it is reliant on the existence of something which doesn't need it gripping to its hull to operate on its own? Making a video about putt-putt games doesn't make a putt-putt game change. Asagao is kind of trying to reverse that process, or take it another layer deeper, to take a bunch of creators who may not even make original valuable work and turn them into original valuable work whilst still being tied to them. It's kind of a doomed vessel. Its sails are made of tissue, and the game's only consistent downfall is when it's dragged back down to its premise, to those inane questions like, how did I get here into this particular story from watching top 10 videos? And what is it about a bunch of people who made top 10 videos online that makes them worth the time to make a game this good about? And it pulls up that parasocial element into this wildly heightened state of not even knowing why I was invested in NormalBoots at all when you try to take it this far. What was there to give a shit about? Why did I care? What's original about this? It's not telling a story. It's not its own thing. I don't give a shit about a Burger King game. I'm sorry. Why did this inspire me? And I have to think about that when I play Asagao. And I know that anybody could look at what I'm still making today and say the exact same of me. Why is this important to me? What am I doing this for? What, if anything, original am I bringing to the table? What stories am I telling? Could I just work on my skill set to produce standalone, more meaningful work? I could make another album. But nobody would listen to that one either. Because it wasn't about a game. Cara's latest game is another visual novel work, one which stands in full-on contrast to Asagao Academy. It doesn't fictionalize content creators. It only takes about an hour to get through. Much of it is spent looking at a black screen, just reading words and picturing events for yourself. It's called To Be With You, and it is a semi-autobiographical account of Cara's own experiences of living with an abusive partner. I will be spoiling this game as little as possible because it's a very short game. I won't even be discussing it at length. I just want to insist that if you're up to it, that you go and play it. It's online. It's on Steam. It's only a few dollars. It's called To Be With You by Illis Seed. Go and play it. It's very, very good. And it struck me after having replayed Asagao, the shift that this game sort of signifies for Cara's career. Going from making a game which turned out like a huge game, which turned out to be very caught up in very temporary, very muddy, very difficult subject matter in Asagao, to making To Be With You, which is just so much more important. Like on a broad scale, a game which tells this kind of story to raise awareness, help, and educate people, coming from someone who's been in that particular situation, who has this exact skill set and has the drive to do it, is the kind of really crucial storytelling that I think games need more of. There is an urgency to Be With You. It's only an hour to get through, but I walked away with so much. And I just had to ask Cara why she made it. Why was this, like, how did you as a creative choose which projects are worth your time and worth your energy when this particular game, I can imagine, was a pretty difficult headspace to be in? What about it was, or about any project, helps you decide this is a place where I'm going to stay when something else might be a bit less trying?
You know, for me, I always knew that I was going to make To Be With You. It occurred to me while I was making Asagao, actually, and I was like, this is going to be something that I make. I just need to be able to get good enough. I need to be able to get good enough, and I need, like, the right time that I can make it. And the right time came when Playcrafting asked me to be part of their Graffiti Games initiative, because they gave us money. They gave us money to work on the game, and that was the only way that I could justify it. So it was kind of like, it's now or never for me. And I just, since the idea for the game occurred to me, I just felt really strongly that there was something to be gained from going through the actual experience, or as close to the actual experience as I could make it, of being in an abusive relationship. Because when I was in mine at the time, nobody around me knew that it was happening. And, you know, you hear comments all the time about, like, oh, why did they stay, blah, 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 like all that kind of thing. There's just a real, even me, I knew what abusive relationships looked like when I went into my relationship, and it was so different once I was in there that I just didn't actually realize that that's what was going on until way, way too late. So I wanted to give people a really clear example, because I knew that there would be people out there who were just like me, who were like, maybe, you know, there is something weird about this relationship, but my partner, they're just in a really bad place right now, so I should be supportive. And, you know, just not interpreting things through that hostile lens, because why would you when you're dating somebody who says that they love you, and it's such a slow burn to really get to the depths of badness that To Be With You shows. It just creeps up on you a lot more easily, especially if you're an empathetic person. So I knew that if I made this game, and if I could capture that experience well, then there would be other people who were like me, who wouldn't have to go through everything that I went through. And I really, really wanted to make that happen. I really, really, really wanted. If there was literally anything that I could do to try and prevent other people from experiencing that, then I wanted to do it.
Was it a difficult game to write in that respect, because you wanted it to be so true to life?
Yes and no. It actually like came to me really easily. Like I got the email to like, would you like to be a part of this? And I sat down the same day and wrote out like an outline for what I thought the game could be. And sitting down and writing it, I think I didn't realize how difficult it was until after I was done and like I put the game out and I just felt like empty. I just felt like I had such a mission and I don't think that I realized how much of my own emotions, were getting stirred up and how difficult it was, except for the fact that I wrote it in like 3 bursts, which I don't normally do. I don't normally like have to dip in and out of it, but I think it was something that I needed to let settle and get some space from so I could come back to it and be like, oh, that sounds a little bit too evil or whatever it is.
I guess I could share my experience of the game, just a brief moment of it. There was, like you mentioned, that initial feeling of like, oh, why is she sticking around with this guy? But I went through just a couple different broad strokes of emotions and just initially it was like, oh, red flag, get out of there, girl. What are you doing? Then it was like, oh, fuck this guy. And then it was just deep, deep sadness of like, you have hurt this person so fully. And I'm so sorry for you. I'm so sorry that this has happened. I know what we talk about, what an abusive relationship looks like, but I do think this game is really important. Has been important for me to understand more of what it looks like and more of the behaviors to watch out for in my friends or in people that I know, whether they're being abused or whether they are themselves abusers. Yeah, thanks for making it.
Yeah, you're welcome. It makes me really, really happy to hear everything that you just said about it.
Yeah. There was in particular that one fucking scene with the Melissa character. Just like, oh my god.
Oh my god!
That one was like punch to the face.
And hearing what Cara said about this game, which again you should play, really brought to focus the kind of work that not just any creative but any person could dedicate their life to me. Even if you are just making fun videos in your house, what is it about that work that is important to you? Why are you doing this? Why is it important? My initial goal on YouTube 10 years ago was to be like Peanut Butter Gamer. That's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to make videos. I didn't want to be famous. I wanted to be like him. I wanted to like myself as much as I liked him. I wanted other people to like me as much as I liked him. None of that's about the work. None of that is enough creatively to push me to realize and say, I love making videos, because I didn't. I only really discovered what I love about video making and what I want to do with this field and why it is important to me last November. It took that long because before I was more focused on shooting for other people than for my own goals. Their inspiration just pushed me in their direction. I can't say it for Asagao, but I can say it for my own work. Those old videos didn't just rely on the games that I was talking about. They relied on their inspirations for their form, their relevance, their jokes, their scripts, their anything. There was no other reason for them. And the saving grace of Asagao Academy NormalBoots Club is that there was another reason for it, to introduce people to visual novels, to open up that world of games to more people through familiar faces, but on its own 2 feet, it still stands solidly because it doesn't just rely on its inspirations for its form. Maybe it wouldn't exist without NormalBoots people as the face of things, but hearing Cara talk about how it was made behind the scenes assures me that even if NormalBoots wasn't involved, that wouldn't have stopped anybody who made the game from making a very similar project at some other point in their careers. Most of them already were. To Be With You may also be a game that was inspired by Cara's experiences, as grim as that sounds. A documentation of a time or of experiences of the recounting of a kind of relationship, of certain things that happened, but it also exists for other particular goals, ones which she waited for the right time, the exact right time to try and achieve. She was passionate about that goal and had a seemingly deep need to tell this story, no matter how long she had to wait to achieve it, no matter how much improvement in her skill set she felt she would need to amass in order to be able to pull it off. She waited for it. The inspiration wasn't the only thing that was going on. So in regard to my initial questions, I think the line between influence and creation exists where you run out of momentum. Because running with your inspiration is really easy. Things feel like they happen on their own. Your ideas are being fueled from somewhere else. Things start out in a flow state. You don't even have to think. You're acting on instinct. It's when that turns into a headwind and things start getting difficult and you decide to walk into it anyway. No matter how long it takes, because there's a goal further away than inspiration alone will take you to, that you need to reach. Without that goal solidly in your mind, inspiration is blown away and you're left asking the hard questions about what you're actually doing there at all after you've already started, and nothing you've made feels like it really meant much or was worth the time. It barely even counts as practice because it wasn't even hard. Is there a particular style or artist who you're trying to be like, or is it something that they're doing that you're learning from, adding to your tool belt and using in your own journey? Taking inspiration is really great, but allowing it to dominate too much of a creative process, as we've all done sometimes, or getting too caught up in the heat of the moment can leave us asking those harder questions too late, and it can lead to careless and, in my frank opinion, often just worthless work that you didn't add enough of yourself to. I'm not saying that everything you make has to be on the level of urgency of to be with you on a story like that. I am saying that it's always worth considering what it is about the thing that you're making or the thing that you're doing that is important to you, only to you, and being satisfied with that answer. If it's a goal that you really believe in, you'll naturally, on your own, decide to do what it takes to get there right. No one's going to have to ask you. It'll just happen. You'll decide to do that naturally. But if it's something that you don't really care about, if it's taking too much from you, if you don't really believe in it, that's just life advice by that point, eh? I find imitation to be extraordinarily easy. The thing about this that I actually cared about achieving or realizing with my work was a lot harder to come by. I made so many things that didn't have a spine, didn't have a point, and it's why I was lazy when I made them. So does a creative person owe those who inspire them a debt?
No. I don't think that. I think that what we as creative people do, I don't know that we necessarily owe anybody, but all of us stand on the shoulders of giants, right? Literally none of us would be able to create anything if all of the authors and video makers, filmmakers, photographers, just everybody hadn't come before us, and everything that we do is built on the work of the people who come before us. And so I think that your inspirations are your inspirations, and they can influence you, and you can take as much inspiration and hope and learning from them as you can. But I also think that the idea of owing anybody who's inspired you, that misses the point that people are humans, and they're not like monolithic beings who, like, oh, they've come down from on high and blessed you with the desire to be an author in my case, or a video essayist in your case. And so they're just people who make things, and we like the things that they make, and we want to see if what we can create and what we can improve on afterwards. So we owe each other everything rather than just one particular person. We owe creativity itself and all creative people our best work, I guess.
That is goddamn beautiful. That is really, really lovely.
I wasn't initially sure why this felt like I was saying goodbye to something, but the ultimate moment of irony happened after I started working on this video, after I'd written everything down. The hard drive where I kept all my old videos, the silver one, decided that it was old enough to start causing me problems. It doesn't appear to be corrupted or damaged at all, but when I plug it in, it doesn't work. and it's just started crashing Windows whenever I do. It just doesn't work anymore. Maybe I'll get them off there someday. It might just be a load off my mind. Hi, thank you so much for watching and I hope you enjoyed. I'd like to say an especially massive thank you to Cara for coming on board on this project. If you'd like to follow Cara on socials, Twitch, Twitter, anything at all, you can find her at Cheritomo, and links to her stuff is below. And again, if you'd like to see the full interview with Cara, you can find that over on my Patreon. There's some really cool bits that I had to cut out of this video for time, mostly like stories and such that I think are really fun and interesting. So go on over to the Patreon if that's something that you'd like to see.
It was like a straight hallway down, right? And I look, and there's a mass of people literally filling the entire space, just like cascading towards me.
He's the only member of the game that I've ever actually spoken to.
Make sure to like this video and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. I've got a lot more coming on the way, some really cool stuff in the very near future. So I hope you stick around and enjoy what I'm going to create. Thank you so much for being here and have a great day.